Ploy skills are annoying debuffs that can affect units from all the way across the entire map. At the start of the turn, if the unit with a Ploy skill has 1 or more res than an enemy in a straight line with that unit, then the enemy will receive a -3, 4, or 5 stat debuff until the end of their next turn. There are variations for each stat, such as attack Ploy, and they can all be very powerful when played right. Now there is a special Ploy skill that does not use resistance to compare stats, and that is Panic Ploy. Panic Ploy uses HP as in a comparison, and instead of debuffing stats, it will inflict the panic status, which turns all bonuses into penalties. Bonuses are basically buffs, also visible as those blue numbers on your unit stats. This skill can be used to change the tides of battle quite dramatically. So just to be clear, the in-game skill descriptions use the term cardinal directions. If you don't know what that means, essentially those are referring to north, east, south, and west. Keep in mind that the range for ploys are infinite, unlike skills like Threaten Defense, which only reach out 2 spaces. This can make things difficult for you or your enemies, depending on the map layout. How effective are ploy skills in battle? Well, for starters, the main ones except Panic Ploy all use resistance to compare between units. If you have played this game for a while, you would have seen that a lot of units don't have a high resistance stat. For ploys to activate, you just need to have a higher res stat by 1 point, and by the wording, I believe you cannot tie. Since not many units have high res stats, you obviously do not want to give these skills to someone who would never be able to activate them, so make sure you choose wisely. Again, since ploys have an infinite range in a line, they are devastating in choke points. Your ploy user can debuff from a long range and debuff multiple enemies as long as their res stat is higher than all of those opponents. Now just because you have an infinite range in a line doesn't mean you can get lazy. Positioning is key in this game, and for ploy skills you really need to pay attention to how your opponents will move, since the effect will only activate at the start of your turn. So Panic Ploy and the panic status in general can work havoc on teams that use a lot of buffs. Not only do you neutralize those buffs, but you actually penalize the enemy by applying them as debuffs. Do keep in mind that Panic Ploy works off your current HP, so you need to ensure your panic user doesn't get too low on health. Another thing about ploys are that there are Sacred Seal versions, which means you can run multiple ploys or at least use another C skill. At the moment, there's only Panic Ploy and Attack Ploy seals, but it seems like versions from other variants will come eventually. So ploys are great, right? But is there such a thing as too many ploys? Well, if you enjoy the playstyle of ploy skills, then Arvis is your man. His legendary weapon, Val Flame, has attack and res ploy 2 effects. He also comes with defense ploy as his C skill, so I think in the future, when a speed ploy seal releases, Arvis could run all 4 stat ploys. Keep in mind that if you have teammates who grant buffs of some kind, then you can really start to see a big difference. If you inflict -5 defense on the enemy, and then a teammate grants a +4 attack buff, then you now have a difference of 9 from what the usual would be. One thing to keep in mind is that if you fail to activate a ploy, then you essentially wasted that skill, and you could have instead tried out using a buff to at least get some advantage rather than getting none. In my experience, I think it is more effective to mix in ploys with teammates who can also grant buffs to take advantage of those debuffs. So, if you run attack ploy and speed ploy, you want teammates who can buff defense or res, and speed, so you can really start to see a difference. So personally, I think ploys can be extremely powerful in the right situations, but buffs are definitely more user friendly. You can't just run ploys expecting to see instant improvements, you will need to be cautious with your positioning. Another thing is that I would say ploys are definitely not for everyone. You might want to check out some resources that can compare resistance values. Generally, over 30 res is pretty high in this game, but then you need to keep in mind about those units who have higher res stats than that, and if they pose a problem. Some PvE content has units with insane res stats, so sometimes running a ploy may just not be worth it. As I said before, buffs and spurs can be used on anyone, just watch out for enemy panic effects. Again, remember that a -4 debuff on the enemy is the same as giving your own units a +4 defense/res boost. Sort of. While battle calculations do factor in a lot of things, such as the weapon triangle, and there are other skills that can be affected by stat changes, my main point is that, hey, instead of running a ploy, maybe a buff would have been a more reliable choice. I also want to reiterate that I do think mixing enemy debuffing with your own units buffing can be quite a really strong tactic. Both skill types have pros and cons, but they actually make a really nice team together. Now let's talk about the future. Could there be ploy skills that use defense instead of resistance to compare? Personally, I think the threaten line of skills are the melee equivalent to ploys. If you think about melee units need to get close to the action to debuff in a shorter range, you could compare it to letting ranged units debuff from afar but in a smaller spread, and needing to fulfill some extra requirements. Basically, threatening skills don't require stat comparisons, but they do lose the long range that Ploys have, so I think it's a little fair. I hope this video helps some of you better understand what Ploys can do. I think debuffing in general is something I myself am not very well versed on. It is a topic that I will surely make more videos on, and I will probably return to Ploys as well, sometime in the future. As for my next video, maybe it can be used as a follow-up to this one. I will be covering Arvis and the power of his mighty Hellfire. I'll see you guys in the next Fire Emblem Heroes guide.